can't help but wonder, there has to be a cleaner way to do this. And that's exactly what we're about to hear about next. David Bolderoff, CEM, is going to be our next speaker. David is the fleet manager for the sanitation districts of Los Angeles County. A little info on him. The Sanitation Districts of Los Angeles County is a large government agency that manages landfills, transfer stations, material recovery facilities, compost facilities, power plants, and wastewater treatment plants, serving approximately 5.5 million people over approximately 800 square miles. He manages a fleet of 1,100 assets that consume 1 million gallons of fuel per year. That's a lot of numbers. David was born and raised in Australia and lived in Germany, Indonesia, and New Zealand before migrating to the United States in 2007. Prior to arriving in the U.S., he worked for a number of large mining contractors, commissioning and maintaining large fleets of mining equipment in diverse and unique locations around the world, including the Borneo jungle in Indonesia. Dave became AEMP Certified Equipment Manager, CEM, in 2014. He served on the AEMP Board of Directors since 2015 and is currently chair-elect. He holds a bachelor degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Technology in Perth, Western Australia, and an MBA. Let's give him a welcome.
Okay, thanks, Natalie. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So today we had a lot of different and interesting topics. First we started off today with Kevin McCarthy, who spoke about blind spots. And one of the best things I feel about AEMP education conferences is really getting the end users, the dealers, the OEMs out there or into this room together and talking about new developments and technology or new ideas, to help reduce the number of blind spots that we have in our own organizations. And then after lunch today, we had Skanska and Volvo talk about some really new, exciting technology on their full electric side, that could potentially reduce emissions by 98%. That's huge. But as we discussed in the Q&A session there, it's still in that pilot stage, so there's still a couple of years out before we see further development and full-scale production of those machines, which we're all dying to get into our fleets. So, building on that, today I'm going to talk about a new opportunity. It's a relatively new fuel type that could be implemented in our fleets today, and that we're actively doing, that can actually reduce emissions from anywhere from 65 to 90% with no changes in really what we're doing today. So first of all, I just wanted to kind of start off with a quick exercise. Could I get all the people that operate or maintain a fleet of heavy equipment, could I get you all to stand right now? Stretch those legs. So this presentation is about fuel, so I just really want to kind of gauge the crowd, people that we have in the room, and how much fuel we're actually using today. So we'll play a quick little exercise here. You kind of just keep standing, and I'm going to throw out some numbers. So if you use more than 200,000 gallons a year, please keep standing. We're talking about diesel fuel consumption here. So we've got various size fleets from small, medium to huge fleets that operate around the country. Okay? If you use more than 500,000 gallons per year, keep standing. Okay, if you use more than 1 million gallons a year, please keep standing. Okay, 2 million gallons per year. Still got a few people standing. Anyone more than 3 million gallons per year? Come on, John, now you're just showing off. Okay, so you can see we got some heavy hitters out here that have sites nationally, like John Meese there with Waste Management. Uses a lot of fuel. He also uses a lot of alternative fuels as well in his fleet. Okay, to set the stage here, diesel fuel consumption, it's estimated that 80% of the total energy consumed in agriculture, construction, industrial and logging industries. However, we know that there's only a finite supply of fossil fuels in the world at the moment. So what are we going to use for generations to come? This is the type of topics that Scancer and Volvo brought up earlier today. So we're really seeing a paradigm shift where leading fleets are switching to alternative fuels and renewable fuels derived from biomass and other sources. These include biodiesel, renewable diesel, and renewable natural gas. This will help to offset the reliance on fossil fuels and reduce the overall carbon footprint, which is a much more sustainable approach to how we do business. This presentation will focus on what we call green diesel, which is an emerging drop-in fuel that is chemically and structurally almost identical to conventional petroleum-based diesel. It is a hydrocarbon diesel produced by hydroprocessing fats, vegetable and waste oils, and greases, which we commonly refer to as fog. Green diesel is referred to by many names, some priority to brands or processing. The most common is renewable diesel, or RD for short. And this is what I'm going to use in my presentation going forward. But as you can see, some of the other names used are listed on this slide. The hydrotreated vegetable oil, HVO, is very common in Europe, and paraffinic diesel is also another common name. Okay, renewable diesel is not biodiesel. This is one of the biggest misconceptions out there today. We've all had somewhat of an experience, I believe, with biodiesel, and quite often that was a negative experience, particularly with premature failures on engines. RD production uses similar steps to petroleum diesel refinery, but uses the same feedstock as biodiesel. So here on the left-hand side, you can see that the same fuel source, which is what we refer to as fog, fats, oils, greases, is utilised. With renewable diesel, the fat or oil reacts with hydrogen in a process called hydrotreatment, and with that you remove the oxygen by converting it to water, and it converts into this paraffinic fuel type. You can see the long strain there, which is very pure. Whereas with biodiesel, you react the fat or the oil with methanol through a transesterification process, and you convert that to glycerol, yet the oxygen still remains in the molecular structure. So, and that's generally referred to as FAME, and not a pure structure as the renewable diesel. Okay, biodiesel processing requires a lot less energy, like 50 to 80 degrees C and 1 bar of pressure, whereas RD requires 350 to 500 degrees C at 20 to 70 bar pressure, so it needs a lot more energy to create. And one of the byproducts of RD is actually, rather than glycerol, it's propane. And what you can actually do with that propane is use it back in the production cycle, so that reduces some of the energy requirement. Okay, typical properties of diesel. So here I'm trying to show you a snapshot of what petroleum diesel looks like, biodiesel, and renewable diesel to compare and contrast the three sources there. So we use petroleum diesel as kind of the baseline. And what I've kind of marked in red and green there is to show the pros, the good elements, which really on the renewable side on the far right really shows there's a lot of benefits with cetane, sulfur, NOx emissions, cloud point, oxidation, stability, cold flow properties, and lubricity, all benefits of using renewable diesel. A typical downside with a lot of alternative fuels such as gasoline, natural gas, and propane is a reduction in energy density. This is quite common, and we have to kind of work that into the equation. One of the biggest downsides in biodiesel, as you can see on the top line there, it actually has a 12% reduction in energy density. So that means you need more fuel to do the same work in that engine. Whereas with renewable diesel, it's actually on par with petroleum diesel, or potentially a 2% increase in energy density, so which is a really positive there. Okay, feedstock. The feedstock is generally referred to as fog, fats, oils, and greases, like we discussed before. We are currently getting all our supply of RD from a refinery in Los Angeles called Altair. And one of their biggest sources of feedstock is tallow. Those that aren't familiar, tallow is basically waste fats from other industries, and quite commonly in LA they're getting it from cows. So basically we're using remains of the fats from waste products from other industry, like the cosmetics or meat industry, and we're using those scraps and converting it into refineries to renewable diesel. Other sources include waste fish products, cooking oils, vegetable oil residuals from restaurants, tall oil pitch, crude palm oil, rapeseed oil, and waste greases. And what I'm really kind of excited about is, looking ahead in the future, in maybe 5 or 10 years, we've got companies that have announced, like Neste, who's the biggest producer of RD in the country, that in the next 5 or 10 years they could be producing up to 1 million, or they could be utilising 1 million tonnes of plastic, of waste plastic around the world, and converting that into a diesel product, which is very exciting to see these other waste type products getting converted into a usable fuel. So I have some good samples on my desk back in Los Angeles, and I was going to try and bring them here today to show you. It's really amazing to see what the two differences look like. But, unfortunately, TSA doesn't like me carrying diesel fuel on a plane. As you can kind of see from the picture here, it's a very clear, pure substance. It actually has almost zero aromas as well. And on the right-hand side, you can kind of see the petroleum diesel product, which we're all very familiar with. It's cloudy and it's got a very distinct smell, which could create some other issues in the industry. As mechanics and operators, if you're doing your pre-start inspection and you've got a fuel leak on your machine, you can kind of use your nose and smell it. Whereas now, if you've got zero aromas, you need to maybe look a little bit closer if you've got a fuel leak on that machine. Just something to be aware of. Some of the other benefits of renewable diesel: it can easily be blended with petroleum or diesel, biodiesel in any mix. It's a paraffinic fuel, so it has a great cetane number, has a desirable cloud point, so great for winter use. Sulfur is very low for emissions. Stability is excellent, so unlike biodiesel, which if you leave in storage tanks for longer periods of time, it can break down and cause issues and not be, you basically have to dump it. That's not a problem here, and like you said, zero aromas or near zero, so very good there. So basically what that means is you don't really need to spend millions of dollars on infrastructure changes. It's a drop-in fuel, you put it in your tanks and you're ready to go. This is a good example of a picture of renewable diesel versus petroleum diesel, and with the high cetane level, you can see the efficient combustion in this example here. Renewable on the left-hand side, petroleum on the right-hand side. You can see the difference in soot it emits, which is really particularly evident in low temperatures and low engine loads where the engine's low. Okay, increasing the life of diesel engines. We're also seeing positive results here. So this is a sample that was done on the combustion chamber of a Webasto auxiliary heater with about 21 hours of operation. On the left-hand side, you can see it with the renewable diesel test. On the right-hand side, you can see it with ultra-low sulfur diesel. And just after 21 hours of operation, you clearly see on the right-hand side, the top of the combustion chamber clearly has a build-up of carbon in there after that short period of time. Because of the clean burning of the renewable diesel, there's basically no carbon build-up there. Okay, reduced maintenance costs. We've done a number of testing in our fleet, but due to the good combustion and and reduction in issues on the fuel systems, we're actually seeing improved maintenance costs on Tier 4 engines with DPFs. This example was taken from the Cummins website. Two examples here. On the top one, it's a Cummins engine, 15 litre. An example on ultra low sulfur diesel with a DPF. So basically you're putting this fuel into the engine, it's coming out of the engine, going into the DPF. As it comes out of the engine with ultra low sulfur diesel, we're assuming that there's 10 mass units of PM being emitted out of that engine. You put it through the DPF. We all know that most OEMs, DPFs are rated at about 90% efficiency. So you're going to pull 90% of that PM out of the exhaust stream, and you're going to see one mass unit emitted out of the tailpipe. So this results in a PM reduction of 90%, which we all know today. Below that, you can see this same example with RD and a DPF. So what we've seen is typically on the right-hand side there, you can see the emission reduction. So in particulate matter, we're about 30% reduction in particulate matter due to the clean combustion process and the feedstock it's made from. So when you apply that 30% reduction in PM, you start off with 7 mass units coming out of that engine. When we throw that 7 mass units into the DPF, you apply the same factor of 90%, and you get 0.63 mass units emitted out of that tailpipe, which results in almost a 94% reduction in PM compared to the 90% on the same example using ultra low sulfur diesel. So what does that mean in maintenance costs? Well, if you're getting less PM and soot build up into that DPF, it means it needs to regen less times. And if it needs to regen less times and less soot is built up into that, you can extend the maintenance intervals on your DPF. So what we're typically benchmarking on our fleet at the moment, if OEMs are saying 5,000 hour service interval on that DPF, we could potentially push that out to 6,500 hours or plus, just because of the reduced PM going into that filter. So we see that as a huge benefit going forward. But you probably can't read this, particularly from the back, but it wasn't really designed to be that way. But you can look at this in the future, and the slides are available on the app there. But basically, I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of who are the big producers of renewable diesel across the world. The top 2 producers, Neste and ENI, are both European manufacturers, but we're really seeing a shift of more production facilities coming online in the US. Particularly, you can actually convert a petroleum refinery into a renewable diesel refinery, so there's some of that going on in the industry at the moment. The biggest US producer is Diamond Green, who currently has 275 million gallons of production in Norco, Louisiana. They are increasing that same plant with another 400 million gallons of production within the next year or two. And they also have a new facility designed for Port Arthur, Texas, coming online, which would produce another 400 million gallons. So, we're above 1,000 million gallons per year of production capacity there. REG, another well-known producer of biodiesel. If those guys using biodiesel at the moment might be familiar, they've got 13 production facilities around the US. They've been in the renewable diesel game for a little bit of time. They've got a facility in Geismar, Louisiana, that produces about 75 million gallons per year. And they're also in a joint venture with, Phillips 66, to build a large-scale facility in Washington State. There are also a number of refineries where I'm at in Los Angeles, and a few new ones coming online, particularly using waste fats and waste greases from the restaurant industry. Altair is the major one there in Southgate, California. And also just an interesting point to note, East Kansas Agri-Energy is about an hour south of here, 60 miles south of here in Garnett, Kansas. They're a small producer. They've got an integrated ethanol and RD facility It's currently offline due to maintenance issues, but they expect that to get up and running the first of the year. So there is someone close producing it as well. Neste at the top, they're still the biggest producer, like I said before. They're producing about 60% of the world's production. A lot of that is coming into the US and California through their major facility in Singapore. So, and they're looking to expand that facility in Singapore. So, and Neste is a $16 billion a year company, so there's no small entity. They're, got huge pockets and really pushing this product around the world. And also, I just wanted to know, Big Oil, Valero, and Phillips 66 are also working on joint venture projects. So the Big Oils recognize this as a source for end users like us that we want, and they're backing it with their money as well, kind of diversifying their portfolio. Okay, what are OEMs saying? Okay, if you talk to most OEMs and dealers out there, which I did a lot when I first got into this, there's really a lack of understanding of what renewable diesel is. Their first instinct is biodiesel, so it's not really on a lot of their radars at the moment as well. But I did a lot of research and reached out to a lot of OEMs. This is what companies are saying. Firstly, Caterpillar through sustainable initiatives supports the development and use of renewable fuels. If a renewable or alternative fuel fulfills the performance requirements described in CAT specification, the latest version of ASTM D975, then the fuel or blender fuel can be used as a direct replacement for petroleum fuel or CAT engines. John Deere, renewable diesel is basically identical to petroleum diesel fuel that is created by hydrotreating fats and oils. Renewable diesel that meets EN 590, which is a European standard, or AST D975, the US standard, is acceptable at all percentage mixture levels. Similar from Volvo as well, the construction equipment side, they refer to it being a Swedish company. They refer to it as HVO fuels, but they say a similar thing there. We're also getting similar responses from Komatsu and most heavy-duty truck engine manufacturers like PACCAR, Cummins, Mack, and Volvo trucks. Okay, what about engine warranties? Basically, in a nutshell, this is the situation. Most OEMs have detailed guidelines for the use of biodiesel blends, but have limited publicised guidelines for renewable diesel. I mean, this is basically all they have, whereas biodiesel, generally they'll have 2 or 3 page document documenting what you can do. Renewable diesel meets and exceeds the petroleum fuel standard AST D975 for US or European standard EN 590, which is what the diesel fuel standard used by most OEMs. And because it's chemically very similar to petroleum diesel, it's my opinion that OEMs can't avoid warranty just because it's a different fuel source. It meets that standard which they adhere to, so it should be covered under warranty. But I definitely want to open the stage up to OEMs afterwards. If anyone has any comments, open for discussion there. I want to jump into a quick case study that we did at one of our facilities in Los Angeles. In January 2018, a little under 2 years ago, we worked with our local air quality management district, SCAQMD, to perform emission testing on heavy equipment operating on renewable diesel. This was kind of a huge leap for a local air quality management district, because for many years they did not want to acknowledge renewable diesel as an alternative fuel. They had a strong bias to promote other types of fuel like natural gas, hydrogen and electric, but they finally succumbed and agreed to this testing on one of our machines. You can kind of see all the emission test equipment that I highlighted in red there. It's quite a large test apparatus that they kind of mounted on the back of the machine. So this was on a Cat D9T that we run in a landfill. It had an older Tier 3 engine rated at 405 horsepower and in operation at our Shoal Canyon landfill. A third-party AAE Solutions installed their emission testing instruments on the dozer, as you can see behind the cab, and we operated it on both ultra-low sulfur diesel and renewable diesel with the same test apparatus. Okay, here are the results. On this testing, we achieved a 15.5% reduction in NOx. There was no notable change on carbon monoxide. On carbon dioxide, there was a 9% reduction and a PM reduction of 32%. And it should be noted that how we operate our machines, our waste handling machines in that application, they're under high engine loads, so we push trash up slopes, leading to a fuel burn of 15 to 17 gallons an hour. So that is kind of considered by CAT standards in a heavy load situation. Under the same test program with SC, AQMD, we also ran it on a backup emergency generator, and that was on a load bank with a lot lower loads, and that actually produced PM reductions in a range of 47 to 85%, and because of the lower loads on the engine. So it's kind of relative to the application of the equipment as well on your PM reductions. Okay, early adopters. I kind of wanted to show a few companies that have been using this for a number of years. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a lot of government entities, particularly in California. On the right-hand side, you can see a lot of private companies, two large or medium-sized construction companies, DeSilva Gates, an independent construction company in California. I've been using it for a number of years. You can see a lot of the companies are California-based because of the credits and ability to get the fuel at a relatively low price. New York Sanitation's in there, they've been using it for over a year now as well. But the big player out there, UPS, is really known for their driving sustainability standards within the industry, and they're using it across the country where they can get it for their large fleet of trucks for delivering parcels. On our fleet, we started using renewable diesel in September 2008, so just over 2018, sorry, so just over a year ago, and we've utilised over 400,000 gallons. We were utilising it on our heavy construction equipment, which includes scrapers, dozers, loaders, excavators, cranes, grinders, and generators. So, and why I put this up here is if people are thinking about using it and know one of these companies, I encourage you to kind of reach out to these companies and discuss their success stories and how they implement it into their fleets. Okay, so we all know that money doesn't grow on trees, and we're all accountable for budgets, and diesel fuel is generally one of the largest expenses in any operating budget for a heavy equipment fleet. So the question is, how will this impact my budget and the bottom line? To take my fleet as an example, over the past year when we've used 400,000 gallons of fuel, we've actually saved approximately $50,000. And this is a direct comparison to ultra-low sulfur diesel, buying it in a bulk delivery circumstance. So our average savings are about 13 cents a gallon, or about $1,000 on a 7,500 gallon tanker load, which relates to about a 5% savings. So I just want to repeat that one more time. We're getting all these benefits out of renewable diesel, and we're actually saving money. We're actually saving 5% on our fuel budget. So how does this not make good business sense? Okay, I just wanted to say, we're in California, and I just want to kind of say we are sulfur diesels or other carbon-based fuels, which kind of leads to those massive savings. But we are seeing other states like Oregon, Washington, New York, and a few others in the near future that are adopting similar standards at a state level. So I know you guys are based in various other parts of the country, and you might not be able to reduce your costs and have the same experience that we did, but you might be able to purchase it for a nominal increase, and that kind of depends on where you are and your state regulations. So I really encourage you to check with your local suppliers or reach out to one of the RD distributors or refineries to discuss this. But back to that example, what if these credits that we're receiving in California aren't available to offset the higher production costs and or maybe transportation costs depending on where you are in the country? Here's a couple scenarios that I really wanted to run over with you. So the first one, I think, which was brought up with Skanska and the Volvo presentation earlier today, what happens if federal, state and local infrastructure projects mandate the use of alternative renewable fuels. What would your company do? How would you achieve that in the most cost-effective way? Forward-thinking construction companies gain a competitive edge when bidding infrastructure projects, providing a unique way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the overall carbon footprint for the project. Could your company win extra bids by presenting unique solutions like this to large infrastructure projects? And thirdly, the next generation of workers, the younger generation coming into the workforce today, want to work for companies with a focus on sustainability. We're really seeing this with the millennials or the Z generation. And so, if they're demanding this and you want to attract the top talent out there, do you have to have sustainable initiatives to attract this top talent to your organization? So how much of a premium would your company pay if it meant improved other areas of the business? This is something you really should review with your executive management, your CEOs and CFOs. Okay, to summarise what we kind of discussed today, renewable diesel is 100% renewable and sustainable. It has a smaller environmental footprint, 65 to 90% of the carbon reduction, and that's really dependent upon the feedstock used and the transportation process to get it to your facility. It's easy to use as a drop-in fuel. It doesn't require any more capital infrastructure. It has superior cold weather performance. Reduces engine maintenance costs. It lowers the costs. It's a lower cost than other alternative fuels. No blending limits. You can use it in 100% or you can blend it to a lower percentage if that makes sense. It has great storage properties. It's not going to degrade over time, so you can use it and store it the same way as you do with ultra-low sulfur diesel into your emergency generators or other equipment. It's a pure hydrocarbon. We saw it burn cleanly, and it's essentially odorless. So I really want to encourage each and every one of you that manage a fleet of heavy equipment to investigate this new source of fuel a lot further. We all need to do our part in taking more of a sustainable approach by using renewable fuels and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. For those of you that are following further education within AEMP, just wanted to kind of remind everyone that this presentation covered 4 of the 17 core competencies or touched elements on those. And finally, I used some additional resources. So those of you that just don't want to take my word for it, or an example today that really want to see the technical information, I used these resources in my presentation today. There are white papers, so I'm certainly more than happy to share those with you if you guys want to see more of the facts before you jump in and use this type of fuel. So that's the end of my presentation. I tried to make it short and sweet and a big, quick snapshot. But I just want to open the floor now to questions, concerns, statements from OEMs, dealers, end users. John.
Posted some statistics on what our fuel was in a Tier 3 engine and your reductions. Have you looked at what Tier 4 diesel fuel, and would that set of statistics allow you to continue to run Tier 3 in California and not worry about your fleet average tier load?
Yeah, it's a good question, John. Those people that didn't hear it, it was basically saying, the case study that we showed before, showed the large reductions on a Tier 3 engine, and how does that relate to Tier 4 engines? So that kind of relates, John, back to the Cummins example with that engine. By having a DPF there, that does some of the job of reducing the PMs. But I mean, we are in some conversations with our local air quality management district, but yeah, it's very difficult to justify that. But you're exactly right. It's like, do we really have to take it to that next level, or can we, push out some of these mandates about Tier 4 by saying, we've got an overall emission reduction by this much. They haven't quite recognised it, particularly at that state level CARB, but that's a great example of how they should see it. It should be overall reduction in emissions, not necessarily, it has to be achieved by going Tier 4.
If it needs to be Tier 4 interim to achieve those results, because the costs to you and I and anyone else operating in California to go to Tier 4 interim or Tier 4 final, with the inherent issues we have with Tier 4 final, interesting study to enable us to continue to run Tier 3 and rebuild it to achieve the same reduction in emissions which you demonstrated there with clean diesel.
So it sounds like me and you, John, we're going to need to go down to the CARB office and lobby together.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and, you know, we're obviously having some inherent issues, particularly in a landfill situation with Tier 4 engines and some issues there that, because of some of the elements in the air, are creating some premature failures on engines. So if we could do something like this to kind of reduce our emissions, while technology catches up with itself a little bit, that would be huge to companies like mine and John's that work in that type of environment.
So we currently have 4 jobs in California that we're running RD on. So we're running about 150,000 gallons a month using RD fuel. And just making a general statement, so far we haven't had any issues with any of them. We've been running it for 3 to 3.5 years on some of the projects. We haven't seen any issues with engines or DPS. Actually, better performance on DPS or all that also shows that. And it probably averages around 26 cents a gallon premium for us to use the RD versus.
And that's in California?
In California.
And are you using the Neste product, or
What's that?
are you using the Neste product, or you're not sure?
Yeah, it's coming out of LA, so it's through SoCal Fuels, but it's all RD. And those are contracts that require us to take. So that's part of the construction. The other thing what was interesting, and back to the storage piece, which is our stationary generators on a couple of the tunnel jobs, generators with 200-gallon tanks that never started up over a 2-year period, so we didn't have to treat it. We pulled them off the job and ran some of that fuel. Didn't have any issues on the stabilization, even after 2 years of facility.
So that was an interesting point Tim brought up, that yeah, we are seeing a lot of contracts at the moment. Like Tim works for Skanska, and a lot of these infrastructure projects or large projects that large companies are working on are actually requiring that. When we're a government organisation, we recently solicited proposals and recently awarded a $600 million tunnel project. And we kind of went back and forth about, what can we put in that to reduce emissions. We're looking at natural gas and other alternatives, but the market wasn't quite there, particularly moving dirt, and trying to mobilize a fleet for a short period of time. Someone would have to buy a whole new fleet of natural gas trucks and wouldn't quite have a use for them later on. So we didn't want to have to pay a huge premium for this emission reduction. So we looked at other things like RD. And I think I see this going across the country as well. Like, when the supply is there, you're going to see this in infrastructure projects. So that's why it's important to get ahead of the game and figure out who your suppliers are, how you can get it before it gets slammed on you, which it usually does on the fleet side. It's like you have to make it happen tomorrow. So if you can kind of get ahead of the game and understand it, talk to your peers, it really help you out. Anyone from the OEMs? Cat, Volvo, Komatsu, Link Belt. Who else have we got here? Do we have a microphone?
Thanks, David. Great presentation. Matt Meiler from Komatsu. I was curious if you guys measured in your case study fuel consumption directly. I saw that emissions went down. I assume fuel efficiency improved, but did you measure gallons per hour directly? And then the second part of the question is, was there any comment from the operator, the dozer, on whether he could tell he was running a machine that was using renewable diesel rather than the standard fuel?
I got the first part of the question, didn't get the second part.
Could the operator tell a difference in the performance of the machine?
Yeah, so there was no notable difference in performance machine, and we're using it. Subsequent to that testing, we're using it on all our heavy equipment, or about 90% of it. Some of our facilities struggle to get supply just because of their location and smaller quantities, but we're about 90% today on renewable diesel. But yeah, the operators haven't said a word, they haven't noticed any change, and that's where it comes back to that energy density. It's basically, if not more, compared to standard petroleum, ultra-low sulfur diesel. In regards to the emission testing, we didn't actually, it was hard to determine the exact, if there was any differential in utilisation, but we haven't seen that across, after we've implemented across our fleet, we haven't really seen major changes. And it's hard to judge that sometimes just because there's so many other factors involved in levels of operation on that equipment. Last chance for questions, Fred?
Real quick, if oil got to 8,000 barrels, you want more of that stuff, right?
Yeah, so it is kind of dependent on the price of petroleum, and it's offset by a lot of credits. But yeah, if all of a sudden the price of petroleum or the price of oil, barrel of oil skyrocketed, it would make this value case a lot more.
Do we have enough cows?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the biggest challenge at the moment is feedstock, and that's why Neste is investing a lot of money into other sources like plastics and things like that you use, because there is somewhat of a limited supply of cow fats or animal fats is one thing, but it's somewhat limited. But waste oils and greases, and there's some challenges in collecting that in an efficient manner because there's transportation and collecting it in central areas. I know City of Oakland is working on a big project with Neste where they're collecting it all in the county, I think, of Oakland or City of Oakland, and using that in their own city fleet. So yeah, the feedstock is definitely a issue with supply and demand. So you've got refinery capacity and feedstock supply, two limiting resources at the moment, but that's why they're investing a lot of money into R&D into other sources, which is good to see. Okay, I think that'll wrap up my presentation today. I really appreciate everyone's time, and today I believe Jeff was going to come up and talk about our evening reception starting shortly. Welcome, stage.